They say a man only truly knows himself when facing death. But Bear Thornton learned that lesson twice. Once when he saved a life, and once when he was buried alive for the mercy he showed.
Take me!
The sound of a shovel scraping against stone. The suffocating weight of earth pressing down. The desperate gasping for air that wouldn't come. These were the sounds that would haunt Caleb Thornton in the months to come. But before the darkness swallowed him whole, before the red Virginia clay filled his lungs, there was light.
You don't
there was hope.
scare us.
There was a woman whose life he saved, and who would later pull him from the grave that greedy men had dug. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story begins 3 months earlier, on a scorching July morning in 1887, in a place where coal dust mixed with mountain mist and desperate men carved their futures from solid rock. Thunder Ridge, Virginia, a town that clung to the eastern slopes of the Blue Ridge Mountains like a stubborn barnacle refusing to be swept away by the tides of progress. It wasn't much to look at. 50 wooden buildings scattered along a muddy main street, a general store that doubled as a post office, a saloon that never closed, a church that opened only on Sundays, and the mines, always the mines. Black holes burrowed into the mountainside where men descended each morning, never quite certain they'd see daylight again. Caleb Thornton stood in the makeshift medical room behind Murphy's General Store, his massive hands working with surprising gentleness as he sutured a gash across Pete Henderson's forearm. The miner had been careless with a pickaxe, and the blade had bitten deep into muscle and tendon. Blood soaked through the bandages Caleb had already applied, but his hands never trembled, not even when Pete screamed. "Easy now, Pete." Caleb's voice was deep and warm, carrying the soft drawl of these mountains. "Ain't nothing but a scratch compared to what I seen." Pete's face was pale, slick with sweat. "That's easy for you to say, Bear. Your hands ain't the ones getting stitched." Caleb smiled, though his blue eyes remained focused on his work. The needle pierced skin, drew thread, tied knots with mechanical precision. Around them, the room smelled of carbolic acid and old blood. Medical supplies lined rough wooden shelves, bottles of laudanum, rolls of bandages, instruments that Caleb had taught himself to use through trial, error, and desperate necessity. He was 29 years old, though the hardness of mountain life made him look older. 6 feet 3 inches of solid muscle earned through years of swinging a pickaxe and hauling coal. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with premature gray. His hair hung past his shoulders when he didn't tie it back, which was most of the time. A scar ran down his left forearm, a permanent reminder of the mine collapse 2 years earlier. The collapse that had killed his father and 11 other men. The collapse that Jacob Morrison had caused by cutting costs on support beams. That memory never left Caleb. It lived in his chest like a hot coal, burning steady and constant. "There you go." Caleb tied off the final stitch and stepped back to examine his work. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing twice a day, and for God's sake, Pete, watch where you swing that axe." Pete flexed his fingers experimentally, wincing. "You got a gift, Bear. A real gift. My arm feels better already." Caleb was already washing his hands in a basin of clean water, watching the blood swirl pink before draining away. "It ain't a gift, Pete. It's just paying attention. My grandmother taught me that. Said a healer's got to see what others miss." "Your Cherokee grandmother?" "That's right." Caleb dried his hands on a clean cloth. "Best medicine woman these mountains ever knew. She could set a bone, birth a baby, and cure fever all in the same day. Taught me everything I know before she passed." Pete stood slowly, testing his weight. Well, I'm grateful. How much do I owe you? Nothing. Caleb turned away, began organizing his instruments. Just promise me you'll be more careful. Can't afford to lose good men to carelessness. We lose enough to Morrison's greed as it is. The words hung in the air between them. Everyone in Thunder Ridge knew what Caleb meant. Everyone remembered the collapse. But speaking openly against Jacob Morrison was dangerous. The man owned the mines. The man owned most of the town. Cross him, and you might find yourself without work, without a home, without a future. Pete nodded slowly and left without another word. Caleb stood alone in the medical room, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. Dirt and coal dust seemed permanently embedded in the creases of his face. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looked like what he was, a man caught between two worlds. Not quite a miner anymore, though he'd grown up in the tunnels. Not quite a doctor, though he'd saved more lives than most physicians with their fancy degrees. The door opened behind him. Tommy Fletcher burst in, his 16-year-old face flushed with panic and exertion. "Bear!" Tommy gasped for breath. "You gotta come quick! There's someone hurt real bad up by Devil's Gorge." Caleb was already reaching for his medical bag, a battered leather satchel that held everything he might need for emergencies. "Who's hurt, Tommy?" "Don't know." The boy's eyes were wide. "I was checking traps like Pa told me, and I seen someone lying at the bottom of the cliff. Looked like they fell from way up high. And Bear, I think it's one of them Apache." Caleb froze, his hand on the bag's strap. "An Apache? Here?" "Yes, sir." "I seen the clothes, the beadwork. It's definitely one of them Indians from Eagle's Nest territory." Devil's Gorge was a deep ravine that marked the boundary between the mining lands and the territory where Red Thunder's Apache band had settled. They were refugees, really, survivors of the Apache wars that had raged across the Southwest. After Geronimo's surrender in 1886, a small group led by Chief Red Thunder had fled east, seeking sanctuary in the mountains of Virginia. The local Cherokee had welcomed them. The white settlers had watched them with suspicion. An uneasy peace had held for 2 years, fragile as spider silk. And now, someone from that community lay broken at the bottom of Devil's Gorge. Caleb made his decision in seconds. "Show me." They ran. Through the town, past the curious stares of miners heading to their shifts, past Martha Thornton's boarding house, where the old woman watched from her porch with knowing eyes, past the sheriff's office, where Sam Garrett was just stepping outside with his morning coffee. Sam called out something, but Caleb didn't stop, didn't slow down. Tommy led the way, his young legs eating up the distance as they climbed the trail that wound up toward Devil's Gorge. The morning sun climbed higher. Sweat soaked through Caleb's shirt. His medical bag banged against his hip with every stride. Around them, the forest grew thicker. Pine and oak pressed close to the narrow trail. Birds called warnings to each other as the two humans crashed through the undergrowth. Then they were there. Devil's Gorge opened before them like a wound in the earth. 40 feet deep, with walls of gray stone slick with moss and seeping water. At the bottom, barely visible among the rocks and fallen leaves, lay a figure in buckskin and beadwork. Caleb's breath caught. It was a woman. Even from this distance, even broken and bleeding, she was striking. Her skin was the color of burnished copper. Her hair, black as a raven's wing, had come loose from its braids and spread around her head like a dark halo. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a tunic of soft leather decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns of red and blue, leggings that ended in moccasins, a knife belt at her waist, though the blade had fallen several feet away. She wasn't moving. "Stay here," Caleb ordered Tommy. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, ride for Sheriff Sam." "But Bear, what if she's dangerous? What if there's more of them?" "Then you warn the town." Caleb was already looking for a way down. He found a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for his boots. One handhold at a time, testing each grip, he descended. The climb took 3 minutes that felt like hours. Loose stones skittered away beneath his feet. His fingers found purchase in cracks barely deep enough to hold his weight. The medical bag swung dangerously, threatening to unbalance him, but he didn't dare leave it behind. Finally, his boots touched solid ground. Up close, the woman's injuries were severe but not immediately fatal. A deep gash across her scalp bled steadily, matting her hair with crimson. Her left leg bent at an unnatural angle, broken, certainly, possibly shattered. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, suggesting internal injuries or at least severe trauma. Caleb knelt beside her, his massive frame seeming even larger in the confined space of the gorge. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Check the airway. Clear. Check for spinal injury. Possibly, but moving her was unavoidable. Check for major bleeding. The head wound was the worst, but manageable. He was reaching for bandages when her eyes opened. They were the color of amber held up to firelight, gold and brown and fierce even through the haze of pain. She looked at him, and in that moment, Caleb saw no fear, only confusion, quickly followed by wariness. She spoke in Apache, words Caleb didn't understand. Then she switched to English, her accent thick, but her meaning clear. "White man." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone someone might use to identify a snake or a storm cloud. "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said softly. "But right now, I'm just a man trying to keep you alive." Her eyes studied his face, searching for something. Deception, maybe. Cruelty. The things she'd learned to expect from white men. Apparently, she didn't find what she was looking for. Her eyes closed again, and she went limp. Caleb worked quickly. He couldn't do much here, at the bottom of a gorge with limited supplies, but he could stabilize. He used strips torn from his own shirt to create a crude neck brace, immobilizing her head and spine. He wrapped the scalp wound tightly, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. He splinted the broken leg with pieces of fallen branch, binding them with more cloth. All the while, he talked, partly to himself, partly to her unconscious form. "You're going to be all right, ma'am. I know this hurts something fierce, but you're strong. I can see that. Strong enough to survive a fall that should have killed you. Strong enough to make it through whatever comes next." Above, Tommy's anxious face appeared over the edge. "Is she alive?" "Barely." Caleb lifted his voice. "I need rope, long as you can find. And tell Sam Garrett what's happening. Tell him I'm bringing her to my cabin." "Your cabin?" Tommy's voice cracked with disbelief. "Bear, Morrison's going to have a fit if he finds out you're helping an Apache." "Then we don't tell him yet. Now go." The boy disappeared. Caleb sat back on his heels and looked at the woman. Really looked at her. She was younger than he'd first thought. Mid-20s, maybe. Scars marked her arms and shoulders, the kind earned in combat. Her hands were calloused from bow and blade work. This was no ordinary woman. This was a warrior. And someone had tried to kill her. The realization hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. This wasn't an accident. Apache warriors didn't just fall off cliffs. They were trained from childhood to navigate terrain like this, which meant someone had pushed her, or fought her, or both. He looked more closely at the ground around her body. Scuff marks in the dirt, broken branches that looked freshly snapped. And there, pressed into the soft earth near the cliff edge above, the outline of boot prints. White man's boots, at least 3 different sets. This was an ambush. 20 minutes later, Tommy returned with rope and Sheriff Sam Garrett. The old lawman peered down into the gorge, his weathered face creased with concern. "She alive, Bear?" For now. Caleb was already tying the rope around the woman's torso, creating a makeshift harness. But she needs real doctoring, and she needs it fast. Between the 3 of them, they managed to haul her up. It was slow, agonizing work. Every jostle might worsen her injuries, but leaving her at the bottom of the gorge meant certain death. When they finally had her on level ground, Caleb lifted her with the same careful attention he'd give to a newborn. She weighed less than he expected. Her body was lean and hard with muscle, but slight compared to his bulk. He cradled her against his chest and began the long walk back to town. Sam walked beside him, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Not a threat, just caution. "You know what you're doing here, son?" The sheriff's voice was quiet. "Bringing an Apache into town's gonna stir up trouble." "She was dying, Sam. What was I supposed to do? Leave her?" Some would say yes. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then some folks got a lot to learn about basic human decency. They reached Caleb's cabin as the sun climbed toward noon. It was a small structure on the outskirts of Thunder Ridge. One room that served as bedroom, kitchen, and now, apparently, hospital. Caleb had built it himself after his father died, needing space away from the boarding house where he'd grown up, away from the memories that haunted every corner. He laid the woman on his only bed, a rough frame with a corn-husk mattress that suddenly seemed impossibly crude. She deserved better. Clean sheets, soft pillows, professional medical care. All he could offer was rough blankets and his own limited skills. But those skills, limited as they were, got to work. He cleaned the head wound properly, shaving away hair to expose the full extent of the damage. It was deep but clean. No skull fracture that he could detect, though without proper instruments, he couldn't be certain. He stitched it closed with the same careful precision he'd used on Pete Henderson's arm that morning. Smaller stitches, though, neater. He didn't want her to have worse scars than necessary. The broken leg was more complicated. It needed to be set, and that meant causing pain. Caleb hesitated, looking at her unconscious face. Peaceful now, despite everything. He hated what he was about to do, but it had to be done. He gripped her leg above and below the break, took a breath, and pulled. The bone shifted with a grinding sensation that made his stomach turn. She screamed, a sound of pure agony that jerked her briefly into consciousness before she mercifully passed out again. Caleb splinted the leg properly this time, bound it tight, elevated it to reduce swelling. His hands shook slightly as he worked, but his technique remained precise. By the time he finished, 6 hours had passed. The cabin's single window showed afternoon sun slanting through pine branches. Caleb's back ached. His head throbbed. He was covered in blood and dirt and sweat. He washed his hands in a basin of water that turned dark with grime. Then he sat on the floor beside the bed, his back against the wall, and waited. She woke as the sun was setting. One moment she was still, breathing deep and regular. The next, her eyes snapped open and her hand shot toward her knife belt. But the knife was gone, and the sudden movement sent pain lancing through her leg. She gasped, went rigid, then forced herself to relax through sheer willpower. Caleb hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, hands visible and empty, making himself as non-threatening as possible for a man of his size. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe. You're hurt, but you're safe." Her amber eyes found him in the gathering darkness. Suspicion and pain warred on her face. "Where?" Her voice was hoarse. "My cabin, just outside Thunder Ridge. You fell at Devil's Gorge. I brought you here to treat your injuries." She was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Her eyes never left his face. Why? It was such a simple question. Why would a white man save an Apache woman? Why risk the social consequences, the potential violence, the accusations of collaboration? Why care at all about someone from a tribe that most people in Thunder Ridge viewed with suspicion at best, hatred at worst? Caleb could have given her a dozen answers. Because his grandmother was Cherokee and taught him that all people deserved compassion. Because he'd taken an oath to himself to heal anyone who needed it. Because leaving her to die would have violated something fundamental in his soul. Instead, he gave her the simplest truth. "Because you needed help, ma'am, and I was able to give it. That's all the reason I need." She studied him for another long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I am Ayana." Her pronunciation was careful, each syllable distinct. "Daughter of Red Thunder." Caleb felt his breath catch. Red Thunder was the chief of the Apache band at Eagle's Nest, which meant this woman wasn't just any warrior. She was royalty, or as close to it as Apache society recognized. The implications made his head spin. If she died, her people would demand blood. If she lived, but was harmed while in his care, they'd demand blood. And if Morrison found out Caleb was harboring the daughter of the Apache chief, there would be hell to pay from that direction too. But none of that changed what needed to be done. "My name's Caleb Thornton," he said. "Folks around here call me Bear. You're welcome to do the same." "Why Bear?" Caleb smiled slightly, though his eyes remained sad. "My daddy said it's because even as a baby, I was big and hairy and mean when I got woken up too early." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across Ayana's face. "You are very large." "Yes, ma'am, but I promise I'm gentle where it counts." She nodded again, then winced as the movement pulled at her stitches. "How bad?" Caleb told her the truth. He'd learned long ago that patients deserved honesty, even when it was hard to hear. "You've got a concussion, probably. Deep scalp wound that I stitched. Broken leg that I set. Possible internal bruising, though I can't be certain without better equipment. You're going to hurt for a while, Miss Ayana. But barring infection or complications, you should heal up just fine." "How long?" 6 weeks for the leg to knit properly. Maybe 2 months before you're back to full strength." Her jaw tightened. "Too long. It's the best I can do." She closed her eyes briefly, and Caleb could see her wrestling with frustration and fear and something else he couldn't quite identify. When she opened them again, they held a new intensity. "The men who did this." She spoke carefully, watching his reaction. "White men. 3 of them. They wait for me at sacred place. try to kill me. Caleb felt cold rage settling into his bones. Why? To make war. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. If Red Thunder's daughter dies by white hands, Apache fight back. Then white men say Apache are savage. Use it as excuse to take our land. The logic was depressingly sound. Caleb had seen it before in his grandmother's stories. Manufacture a conflict, provoke a response, use that response to justify atrocities. It was an old, ugly pattern, repeated throughout American history. Did you recognize any of them? 1. Ayana's eyes hardened. Scar on throat, like snake. Caleb's blood turned to ice. Cyrus Garrett. Snake. Sheriff Sam's nephew, and one of Morrison's most loyal enforcers. A man known for violence and cruelty in equal measure, which meant Morrison was behind this. Morrison, who'd been eyeing Apache territory for months, ever since rumors started circulating about gold in the sacred lands. Morrison, who'd already killed Caleb's father and 11 others through his greed. Now, he was trying to start a war. Caleb stood up slowly, his massive frame unfolding like a mountain rising. He moved to the cabin's small stove and began preparing soup from the rabbit he'd caught that morning. His hands worked automatically, while his mind raced through possibilities and consequences. Behind him, Ayana watched in silence. When he brought her a bowl of the thin broth, she tried to sit up and failed, pain stealing her breath. "Let me help." Caleb slipped an arm behind her shoulders, supporting her weight as easily as he might lift a child. He held the bowl while she sipped, his other hand steady and patient. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Here was a white mountain man and an Apache warrior, brought together by violence, connected by something neither quite understood yet. Trust, maybe, or just desperate necessity. When she'd had enough, Caleb lowered her back down and pulled the rough blanket up to her shoulders. "You should rest, Miss Ayana. Healing takes energy. Where you sleep?" "Floor's fine. I've slept in worse places." "That not fair. Is your bed?" Caleb smiled, and for the first time there was real warmth in it. "Ma'am, my grandmother used to say that a bed's just wood and cloth, but caring for someone who needs help, that's what makes a man rich. I'm richer tonight than I've been in years." Ayana looked at him for a long moment, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight from the stove. "Your grandmother," she said quietly. "She was Cherokee?" "Yes, ma'am. Taught me everything I know about healing. About seeing people as people, not just their skin color or their tribe. She was wise woman. That she was." Caleb settled himself against the wall, pulling another blanket over his legs. "Stubborn, too. Reckon that's where I get it from." And then something unexpected happened. The corner of Ayana's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "I think," she said softly, "that your grandmother would like you help enemy." "You're not my enemy, Miss Ayana." Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep, but she had enough strength for one more question. "Then what am I?" Caleb thought about it, about this broken warrior in his bed, about the violence that had brought her here, and the violence that surely waited in the days ahead, about Morrison's greed and Red Thunder's justified anger, and the powder keg that Thunder Ridge had become. "You're someone who needed help," he said finally. "And maybe, if we're lucky, you're the beginning of something better than what came before." Ayana's breathing deepened. Sleep claimed her. Caleb sat in the darkness of his cabin, listening to her breathe, and wondered what price he'd pay for the mercy he'd shown. Morrison wouldn't let this stand. The man had tried to murder the Apache chief's daughter. He wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose that truth. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. And in the shadows beyond Caleb's window, unseen and unknown to him, Cyrus Garrett watched the cabin with cold calculation. Tomorrow he would tell Morrison that Bear Thornton had saved the Apache girl. And tomorrow, Jacob Morrison would begin planning exactly how to make Caleb Thornton pay for his compassion with 6 feet of red Virginia clay and a slow, suffocating death in darkness. But tonight, in this moment, there was only the quiet sound of 2 people breathing. One massive and still, one small and broken. Both somehow, impossibly, safe. For now. Dawn came to Thunder Ridge like a whispered warning. The 18th of July, 1887. A morning that would change everything. Caleb woke to find Ayana watching him from the bed, her eyes alert, despite the pain that creased her forehead. She'd been awake for some time, he realized, studying him. Perhaps trying to understand why a white man would risk everything to save someone his people feared. "Morning," he said quietly, unfolding his large frame from where he'd slept against the wall. His back protested with a series of small pops. "How's the leg?" "Hurts." Her voice was stronger than yesterday, though, steadier, but I have known worse pain. Caleb moved to the stove, began preparing coffee and cornmeal mush. The simple domestic routine felt strange with a wounded Apache warrior in his bed. Strange, but not unwelcome. "Can you tell me what happened? The real story?" Ayana was silent while he worked. Outside, Thunder Ridge was waking up. Voices carried on the morning air. The ring of hammers, the creak of wagon wheels. Life continuing as it always had, unaware that the threads holding their fragile peace were already unraveling. Finally, she spoke. "I go to sacred place, Devil's Tooth, to pray for my people, to ask spirits for guidance." Her fingers traced patterns on the rough blanket. "We know white men want our land. We know they look for excuse to take it. So I pray for wisdom." And they were waiting. 3 men, white men. They come from behind. No warning, no honor. She paused, and Caleb heard the anger beneath her careful control. "One I recognize. Snake Man. Scar on throat. He laugh when they attack." Caleb's hands tightened on the coffee pot. "Cyrus. They try to push me off cliff, make it look like accident. But I fight." Ayana's eyes grew distant, remembering. "I kill one, cut his throat, wound another in the leg. But the third, the Snake Man, he hit me from behind. Then I fall." "And they left you to die?" "Yes." She looked at him directly. "They want war, Caleb Thornton. They want my death to make my father angry, to make Apache attack. Then white men say they defend themselves when they take our land." It was exactly what Caleb had suspected. Morrison's plan laid bare in its ugly simplicity. But hearing it confirmed, knowing that men he'd worked alongside were willing to murder an innocent woman, to line their pockets with gold, sent rage coursing through his veins like liquid fire. He brought Ayana her breakfast, helped her sit up enough to eat. His hands were gentle, despite the fury building in his chest. "They won't get away with it," he said. "I've got friends in this town. Good people. Sheriff Sam, he's an honest man." will expose Morrison's plan." Ayana shook her head slowly. "White sheriff believe white man, not Apache. Sam's different. He was a Texas Ranger, worked with Comanche. He knows about honor." "Maybe," doubt colored her voice. "But even if he believe, will others? Will they care?" The question hung between them. Would the people of Thunder Ridge care that Morrison had tried to murder an Apache woman? Or would they see it as justified, as necessary, as the price of progress and prosperity? Caleb didn't have an answer, not one he wanted to speak aloud. The cabin door burst open without warning. Cyrus Garrett stood in the doorway, backlit by morning sun. The scar on his throat stood out livid against his pale skin. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. Behind him, 2 of Morrison's hired guns flanked the entrance. "Well, well." Cyrus's voice was like gravel scraping over bone. "Bear Thornton playing nursemaid to a savage. Ain't that precious?" Caleb stood slowly, placing himself between Cyrus and the bed. His massive frame filled the small cabin, making it feel even more cramped. "Get out of my home, snake." Cyrus smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Mr. Morrison wants to see you. Now. Says you got some explaining to do about harboring enemies of Thunder Ridge." "She's not an enemy. She's an injured woman." "She's Apache. That makes her an enemy by definition." Cyrus took a step inside. "Now, you can come peaceful, or we can drag you. Your choice." Caleb's hands curled into fists. Each one was the size of a small ham, hardened by years of mining work. He'd never been a violent man by nature. His grandmother had taught him that healing was the highest calling. But she'd also taught him that sometimes protecting the innocent required strength. "Touch me, and you'll regret it." One of the hired guns laughed nervously. "Big talk for a coal digger." The confrontation might have exploded into violence right there, but Sheriff Sam Garrett appeared in the doorway, his weathered face stern beneath the brim of his hat. "That's enough, Cyrus." Sam's voice carried the weight of decades enforcing the law. "Nobody's dragging anybody anywhere. If Jacob Morrison wants to talk to Caleb, he can do it civilized-like." Cyrus's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Uncle." "The only mistake I see is you busting into a man's home without cause. Now get on out of here before I decide to arrest you for trespassing." The 2 hired guns exchanged glances. Cyrus stared at Sam for a long moment, then at Caleb, then at the woman in the bed. His eyes lingered on Ayana with undisguised hatred. "This ain't over, Thornton." They left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Sam closed the door behind them and turned to Caleb with a heavy sigh. "Son, you got any idea what kind of hornet's nest you just kicked?" "She was dying, Sam." "I know." The old sheriff moved to the window, watching Cyrus and his men disappear down the road toward town. "And I'm glad you saved her. But Morrison's not going to let this stand. He's been looking for an excuse to move against the Apache. Now you've given him one." "What do you mean?" Sam turned from the window, his lined face grave. "Morrison's already spreading word through town. Says you're in league with the Indians. Says you're helping them plan attacks on the mine. Half the town's scared. The other half's angry. And all of them are looking for someone to blame." Caleb felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "That's insane. I just saved her life." "Doesn't matter. Fear makes people stupid, and Morrison's real good at stoking fear." Sam glanced at Ayana, then back to Caleb. "You need to bring her to a town meeting. Let folks see she's just a hurt woman, not some savage warrior. Let them hear the truth about what happened." "You think they'll listen?" "I think you gotta try. Otherwise, Morrison wins by default." 3 hours later, Caleb stood in the center of Thunder Ridge's main street, with Ayana leaning heavily on a crutch he'd fashioned from an oak branch. Her face was pale with pain and effort. The stitches on her scalp stood out stark against her copper skin, but she held herself with dignity that no amount of suffering could diminish. Around them, the entire population of Thunder Ridge had gathered. Miners in their work clothes, women in simple dresses, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts, all watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Jacob Morrison stood on the steps of the general store like a king, surveying his subjects. He was everything Cyrus wasn't. Handsome in a hard way. Well-dressed in a suit that cost more than most miners made in a month. Silver hair combed back from a face that could have been carved from granite. When he spoke, his voice carried the cultured tones of education and privilege. Friends, neighbors. Morrison spread his hands in a gesture of false camaraderie. We face a crisis. The Apache have been plotting against us, planning to take what we've built through blood and sweat. And now we have proof. He gestured to where Cyrus stood, holding what looked like a hand-drawn map. This was found in the Apache camp, a map of our mine, our schedules, our weak points. They've been planning an attack, and Caleb Thornton has been helping them. The crowd murmured, angry and afraid. Caleb stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise like an axe through soft wood. That's a lie. Morrison's expression didn't change. Is it? Then explain why you're harboring an Apache woman, why you're treating her like a guest instead of a threat. Because she's not a threat. Caleb's voice remained steady, despite the rage building in his chest. She was attacked, thrown off a cliff by men trying to start a war. Men who want you all scared, so you'll support their land grab. Preposterous. Morrison's tone was dismissive. Why would anyone attack her? Ayana spoke then. Her English was accented but clear, carrying across the silent crowd. Because your Morrison want my death, want my father to fight, want excuse to take sacred land where gold is. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Morrison laughed. The word of a savage against mine? Against the man who's brought prosperity to this town? Who do you think they'll believe? And then Martha Thornton pushed her way through the crowd. The old boarding house owner was small and gray-haired, but her voice carried the force of someone who'd lived through too much to be intimidated by the likes of Jacob Morrison. I believe the girl. Martha planted herself beside Caleb. I've known Bear since he was born. He's got more honor in his little finger than you've got in your whole body, Jacob Morrison. If he says this woman was attacked, then she was attacked. Morrison's mask of civility cracked slightly. Martha, you're letting sentiment cloud your judgment, and you're letting greed cloud yours. She turned to the crowd. How many of you have lost family to mine accidents? Accidents that happened because Morrison cut costs on safety. My own husband died in the collapse of '83. Pete Henderson's brother died 2 years back. The Wilkins boy, the Crandall twins, all dead because this man valued gold over lives. The crowd's mood was shifting. Not all of them, not even most, but enough to matter. Tommy Fletcher stepped forward, his young face set with determination. I saw her at the bottom of Devil's Gorge, saw the blood, saw how hurt she was. There was 3 sets of boot prints at the top, white man's boots. Someone pushed her. More murmurs, doubt beginning to creep in. Morrison's face hardened. He'd lost control of the narrative, and he knew it. Time to regain it through force. Sheriff Garrett, his voice cracked like a whip. I'm pressing charges. Caleb Thornton has conspired with enemies of this territory, He's harboring a hostile Indian. I demand his arrest." Sam stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. "On what evidence, Jacob?" "I just told you the evidence. A map that could have been drawn by anyone. The word of a man known to value profit over people. That ain't evidence."
"That's accusation. Then perhaps we need a judge to decide." Morrison's smile returned, cold and sharp. "I've already sent for Judge Harlan from Richmond. He'll be here tomorrow, and he'll see things my way." The threat was clear. Morrison had the money and influence to ensure any legal proceeding went his way. The law, like everything else in Thunder Ridge, could be bought. But before Morrison could continue, a new sound cut through the tension. The thunder of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. The crowd turned as one. 12 Apache warriors rode into Thunder Ridge like a thunderstorm made flesh. They were armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted for war. At their head rode a man who could only be Red Thunder himself. Tall and broad-shouldered, his gray-streaked hair hanging long beneath a headband decorated with eagle feathers. His face was a map of scars earned in a lifetime of battle. But his eyes, when they found Ayana, held only a father's desperate relief. The warriors fanned out, creating a protective semicircle. Red Thunder dismounted with fluid grace, despite his years, and crossed to where his daughter stood. He spoke rapidly in Apache, his hands moving to check her injuries, even as he demanded answers. Ayana responded in kind, pointing to Caleb, to Morrison, to the gathered townspeople. When she finished, Red Thunder turned to face the crowd. His English was heavily accented, but perfectly understandable. "My daughter tells me a white man saved her life. This one," he gestured to Caleb. "This Bear Thornton. She tells me he showed her kindness when he could have shown cruelty, honor when he could have shown hatred." The Apache chief's gaze swept across the assembled townspeople, lingering on Morrison. "She also tells me 3 white men tried to kill her, to make war between our peoples, to steal land that is sacred." His hand moved to the rifle slung across his back. "I come for my daughter, but I also come to say this. If war is what you want, we will give you war. If peace is what you want, we offer peace. But know this: any man who harms my daughter will answer to me. Any man who brings violence to my people will find that violence returned tenfold." The square was utterly silent. Morrison recovered first, his politician's smile sliding back into place. "Chief Red Thunder, I assure you, no one here wishes violence. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Your daughter was injured, and Mr. Thornton, in his ignorance, thought to help. But surely you can see how harboring her without informing the proper authorities creates suspicion." Red Thunder's eyes were flat and cold. "You speak with 2 tongues, Gold Seeker. I have met your kind before. Men who smile while they sharpen knives. Men who speak of peace while planning war." He turned to Sheriff Sam. "This man," he pointed at Caleb, "I trust, because my daughter trusts him. He may bring her back to our camp when she is strong enough to travel. Until then, I hold this town responsible for her safety. If she is harmed, we will know, and we will remember." With that, Red Thunder and his warriors mounted up and rode out as quickly as they'd come, leaving behind a town buzzing with fear and speculation. Morrison's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. He turned on Caleb with venom in his voice. "You've doomed us all, Thornton. Brought the savages right to our doorstep. I saved a woman's life.
Caleb's voice was tired but firm. "If that dooms us, then maybe we deserve it." "Noble words." Morrison stepped closer. "Let's see how noble you feel when they're burning your house down, when they're killing your neighbors, when they're taking everything you have because you were too stupid to see them for what they are." "And what are they, Mr. Morrison?" Caleb met the man's gaze without flinching. "People. Human beings trying to survive, just like us. Or are they something less in your eyes? Something you can kill without conscience and steal from without shame?" Morrison's hand moved toward his coat, where Caleb knew he kept a derringer. But Sam's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't, Jacob." The sheriff had his revolver drawn and pointed at Morrison's chest. Around them, the crowd had gone utterly still. "Here's how this is going to play." Sam's voice was calm, but carried steel beneath it. "Caleb's going to take Miss Ayana back to his cabin and continue treating her. You're going to leave them alone. When she's well enough, she goes back to her people. And we're all going to forget this nonsense about conspiracies and attacks." "You're choosing their side?" Morrison's voice was incredulous. "Over your own people?" "I'm choosing the law. And the law says a man's innocent until proven guilty. You got no proof, just accusations and fear-mongering. Judge Harlan will see it differently. Maybe." Sam holstered his gun. "But until he gets here, my word is law in Thunder Ridge, and my word says you leave Caleb and the girl alone." Morrison stared at the sheriff for a long moment. Then his gaze swept across the crowd, calculating. About half looked sympathetic to Sam's position. The other half looked ready to grab torches and pitchforks. Not good enough odds for direct confrontation. But Morrison was a patient man. He could wait, could plan, could make his move when the time was right. "Very well." His voice was silk over razors. "We'll do this your way, Sheriff. For now." He turned and walked away, Cyrus and the hired guns following like faithful dogs. The crowd began to disperse, people breaking into small groups to discuss and debate what they'd witnessed. Some cast fearful glances at Caleb and Ayana. Others nodded with respect or sympathy. Martha came up and squeezed Caleb's arm. "You did good, boy. Your father would be proud." "Thanks, Martha, but I got a feeling this is just beginning." The old woman nodded grimly. "Storm's coming. Been feeling it in my bones all week. You watch yourself, Bear Thornton." As Caleb helped Ayana back toward his cabin, Tommy fell into step beside them. "Bear?" The boy's voice was quiet. "What Mr. Morrison said about the Apache planning attacks, that ain't true, is it?" "No, Tommy. It's not true." "Then why'd he say it?" Caleb looked down at the boy who reminded him so much of himself at that age, full of questions and idealism not yet ground down by the harsh realities of the world. Because he wants something that doesn't belong to him, and he's willing to lie, cheat, and kill to get it. That ain't right. No, son, it ain't. But it's the way of the world sometimes. Good people gotta stand against it. They reached the cabin as afternoon shadows were lengthening. Caleb helped Ayana inside, noting how the walk had exhausted her. Her face was gray with pain and fatigue. He settled her back on the bed and brought water, checking her stitches and splint with practiced efficiency. "Your father," she said quietly. "He is powerful man, commands warriors. Your father killed men trying to kill you. That makes him a good father in my book." She smiled faintly. "In my book, too." A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, birds called to each other as evening approached. Inside, The cabin felt almost peaceful, despite everything. "Caleb," Ayana said after a while, "what Morrison said about me bringing danger to you, he is right. Maybe. Then why you not send me away? Let my father take me." "Because that's what he wants." Caleb sat in his usual spot against the wall. "He wants me scared, wants me to choose my safety over doing what's right. But I learned young that a man who turns his back on someone in need ain't a man at all. He's just a coward wearing a man's shape." Ayana studied him in the failing light. "Your grandmother. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you. Stubborn warrior who won't quit even when common sense says she should." "Yeah, she definitely would have liked you." Outside, unnoticed by either of them, Cyrus Garrett crouched in the shadows of the tree line. He watched the cabin with patient malice, noting the routine, the vulnerabilities, the opportunities. Morrison had given him new orders, orders that would require careful planning, orders that would end with Caleb Thornton buried 6 feet deep and the Apache given all the excuse they needed to start a war. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, he simply watched and waited. Inside the cabin, Caleb began to hum an old Cherokee song his grandmother had taught him. A healing song, a song of hope in dark times. Ayana closed her eyes and listened, her breathing gradually slowing into sleep. And for this brief moment, in this small cabin at the edge of a powder keg ready to explode, there was peace. But storms were gathering. Morrison was planning, and the fate of Thunder Ridge hung by threads so thin that one sharp word could cut them. Tomorrow would bring new trials. Tomorrow would bring choices that couldn't be unmade. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The 19th of July dawned with the kind of quiet that precedes violence. Caleb woke to find Ayana already awake, propped against the cabin wall with her broken leg elevated. She was testing the strength in her arms, wincing as muscles protested. A warrior's instinct. Even wounded, she needed to know what her body could still do. "How's the pain?" Caleb asked, rising from where he'd slept on the floor. "Manageable." Her jaw was tight, though. The kind of tight that spoke volumes about just how much she was hurting. "When do we leave?" "We? You think I stay here? Wait for Morrison's men to come finish what they started?" Ayana shook her head. "No, I go to my father. Tell him what happened. Prepare our people." "You can barely walk." "Then you help me." Her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that brooked no argument. "Or I go alone, and probably die trying. Your choice." Caleb sighed. His grandmother would have said Ayana was stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. She would have meant it as a compliment. "All right, but we do this smart. Wait until evening, travel under cover of darkness, less chance of Morrison's men spotting us." A knock on the door interrupted them. Caleb tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the hunting knife on his belt. But it was Sheriff Sam's voice that called out. "Bear, it's me, and I got news you ain't gonna like." Caleb opened the door to find Sam looking older than his 68 years. The sheriff's face was drawn, his eyes hollow with worry. "Judge Harlan arrived early this morning. Morrison's already got him convinced that the Apache are planning an attack. He signed papers giving Morrison authority to form a militia." "Legal authority to arm up and move against Eagle's Nest if he deems it necessary." The words hit like hammer blows. On what grounds? Self-defense. Protection of territory. Sam spat into the dirt. It's all legal horseshit, but it's legal. Morrison's got 30 hired guns heading to town by tomorrow, and once they're here,
He won't need much excuse to use them. Caleb felt the walls closing in. We have to warn Red Thunder. That's why I'm here. Sam glanced past Caleb to where Ayana sat listening. You get her home. Tell her father what's coming. Maybe between you and me, we can find a way to stop this before it turns into a bloodbath. What about you? I'll stay here. Keep Morrison thinking everything's under control. Buy you time. Sam's hand gripped Caleb's shoulder. But son, you gotta move fast. Morrison's suspicious. He's got Cyrus watching this cabin, probably planning something. Caleb nodded. We leave tonight. Tonight might be too late. The sheriff glanced at the morning sun. Go now. I'll create a distraction. Draw Cyrus and his boys away from here. 2 hours later, Caleb and Ayana were deep in the Blue Ridge forest, moving as quickly as her injury would allow. He'd fashioned a better crutch from seasoned hickory, and she used it with surprising efficiency, but every step still cost her. He could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the careful way she breathed through the pain. They followed game trails that Caleb had known since childhood, paths that wound through stands of old-growth pine and oak, across streams that ran clear and cold from mountain springs. The forest was alive with summer. Birds called warnings to each other at their passage. Squirrels chattered from high branches. Once, a black bear watched them from a distance, then ambled away with dignified disinterest. You know these woods well, Ayana observed during a rest stop beside a creek. Grew up in them. My grandmother used to bring me out here to teach me about plants. Which ones heal? Which ones kill? She said the forest was a better teacher than any book. Wise woman. Yeah. Caleb refilled their water skins from the creek. She was. Died when I was 17. Left me her knowledge and her medicine bag. Said it was my responsibility to carry on the healing. You honor her. Ayana's voice held respect. She would be proud. I hope so. They moved on. The morning sun climbed higher, filtering through the canopy in shafts of golden light. The temperature rose, bringing out the rich scent of pine sap and earth. Caleb found himself hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the underbrush. Morrison's men could be anywhere, and out here, far from witnesses, murder would be easy to explain away. An accident, a fall, wild animals. Tell me about your people, he said, partly to distract himself, partly because he genuinely wanted to know. About Eagle's Nest. Ayana was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts or perhaps her memories. We come from New Mexico originally. Jicarilla Apache. After the wars, after so much killing, my father see our people dying. Not from bullets anymore, but from broken spirits. So he led small group east, looking for place to live in peace. And you found it here? Cherokee people welcome us, share their land, show us good hunting grounds. For 2 years we live quiet. We trade with white settlers, cause no trouble. She paused. But Morrison, he hear rumors about gold on sacred land, land where our ancestors are buried. Since then, he look for excuse to take it. The gold worth that much? To him? Yes. To us? She shook her head. It is just yellow rock, but the land itself, that is priceless. That is connection to the divine. That is where we speak to those who came before. Caleb understood. His grandmother had felt the same way about certain places in these mountains. Sacred groves where the veil between worlds grew thin, where prayers seemed to rise more directly to whatever gods listened. Around noon, they stopped to rest in a hollow formed by the massive roots of an ancient oak. Caleb shared the food he'd packed,
cold cornbread, dried venison, apples from Martha's tree. As Ayana ate, she reached into a small leather pouch at her waist and withdrew a bundle of dried herbs wrapped in soft deerskin. The scent was unlike anything Caleb had encountered before: sage mixed with cedar and something else he couldn't identify. "For you," she said, pressing it into his hand. "Sacred herbs. If you ever in great danger, burn these. Smoke will carry message to my people. We will come." Caleb studied the small bundle, feeling the weight of what she was offering. "This is a gift of trust and of debt. You saved my life. Now I give you way to save yours." That night, as Ayana slept by the fire, Caleb carefully divided the herbs into 2 portions. The larger bundle he tucked into his coat pocket. The smaller portion he sewed carefully into the hidden lining of his boot. His grandmother had taught him that a man who relied on one plan was a man planning to fail. As Ayana ate, she watched Caleb with curious eyes. "You are not like other white men I have met. That a compliment or an insult?" Observation. She took another bite of apple. "Most white men, they see Apache and see enemy, see savage, see something less than human. You see person. I was raised to see people, not colors. Skin tells you nothing about a soul's worth." "Your grandmother again." Ayana smiled slightly. "She must have been very powerful woman." "Strongest person I ever knew. Could set a broken bone, deliver a baby, and still have energy to tan hides and cook dinner. She survived things that would break most men." "Like what?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. The memories were old, but still sharp. When she was young, soldiers came to her village. This was back during the Indian removal times. They rounded up all the Cherokee, forced them to march west. The Trail of Tears, they call it now. She saw her parents die on that march, her brothers and sisters, buried them in unmarked graves along the road. Ayana's face grew solemn. "I know this story. My people have similar stories." Eventually, my grandmother escaped, made her way back to these mountains, lived here in secret for years. That's where she met my grandfather, a coal miner from Scotland. He kept her secret, married her. My mother was their daughter. "And your mother?" "Died when I was 12. Fever took her." Caleb's voice grew rough. "My grandmother tried everything she knew. Every herb, every prayer, every remedy passed down through generations. But sometimes, death don't listen to healing." Ayana reached out and placed her hand on his. The gesture was simple, but carried weight. Shared grief, shared loss. The understanding that comes from those who've walked through the valley of shadow and emerged scarred but standing. "Your mother would be proud too," she said quietly. "You carry on her mother's work. You heal, even when it costs you." "Costs me?" Caleb looked at her. "How do you figure?" "You lose your home, maybe, your place in town. Morrison make you enemy for saving me. But still you do it. That is true healing. Not just body, but spirit. You heal the sickness in the world by refusing to let hatred win." Before Caleb could respond, a twig snapped in the forest behind them. Both of them froze. Caleb's hand moved to his knife. Ayana, despite her broken leg, shifted into a defensive crouch with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then 5 men stepped from the trees with rifles raised. Cyrus Garrett led them, his scarred throat gleaming with sweat in the dappled sunlight. "Well, ain't this touching?" Cyrus's voice dripped with mockery. The savage and her pet bear having a picnic. Caleb stood slowly, positioning himself between Ayana and the guns. Cyrus didn't expect Morrison's dog to wander this far from his master. Cyrus's smile vanished. "Careful, Thornton. We're authorized militia now, which means killing you would be legal." "On what grounds?" "Aiding an enemy combatant, consorting with hostiles. Take your pick." Cyrus gestured with his rifle. "Now step aside. We'll make this quick for her." "Can't promise the same for you. You'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 5 rifles against 1 knife. Impossible odds. But Caleb had no intention of moving. If they wanted Ayana, they'd have to kill him first. And then the forest exploded with movement. Apache warriors seemed to materialize from thin air. One moment the clearing was empty, save for Cyrus's men. The next, 12 painted warriors surrounded them with arrows nocked and rifles aimed. They'd been there all along, Caleb realized. Watching. Waiting. Grey Wolf, Red Thunder's second-in-command, stepped forward. His face was painted for war, but his voice was calm. "White men, you are trespassing on Apache land. Leave now, or die here." Cyrus's face had gone pale. His men looked ready to bolt. "This ain't over," he spat. "Yes," Grey Wolf said simply. "It is. You leave now, while we let you." For a moment, violence hung in the balance. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would water the forest floor. But Cyrus, for all his cruelty, wasn't stupid. 5 men against 12 was suicide. He lowered his rifle slowly. His men followed suit. "Morrison will hear about this," Cyrus said as he backed away. "And when he comes, he'll bring an army." "Let him come." Grey Wolf's expression never changed. "We will be ready." Cyrus and his men retreated into the forest, casting hateful glances over their shoulders until the trees swallowed them. Grey Wolf approached Caleb and Ayana. His eyes swept over her injuries with concern, then settled on Caleb with frank assessment. "You are the one who saved Red Thunder's daughter." It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. "Yes." "You have courage. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless." Grey Wolf gestured to the other warriors. "Come, we take you to Eagle's Nest. Chief Red Thunder wishes to speak with you." The Apache camp appeared in a valley hidden so cunningly that Caleb would have walked past it a dozen times without seeing. Teepees arranged in careful patterns, cookfires sending thin streams of smoke into the sky, children playing while women worked on hides and men checked weapons. It was a community, a home, not the savage war camp that Morrison's propaganda portrayed. Red Thunder emerged from the largest teepee as they approached. He moved with the controlled power of a man who'd spent a lifetime leading warriors. His eyes found Ayana first, relief and anger warring on his weathered face. Then they turned to Caleb. "You are Bear Thornton." "Yes, sir." "My daughter tells me you saved her life, that you showed her kindness when you could have shown cruelty." "I did what any decent person would do." Red Thunder studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "You lie poorly, Bear Thornton. Most white men would not do what you did. Most would have left her to die, or worse." He gestured toward the teepee. "Come, we have much to discuss, and little time to discuss it." Inside the teepee, seated on buffalo hides around a small fire, Caleb told Red Thunder everything. Morrison's plan, the hired guns, Judge Harlan's authorization, the coming attack. Red Thunder listened without interruption. When Caleb finished, the chief sat in silence for a long moment, his face unreadable. "You bring warning of war," he said finally. "But you also bring something more valuable. You bring proof that not all white men are enemies, that some still know honor. I'm just trying to stop innocent people from dying. That is precisely what makes you different." Red Thunder leaned forward. "Morrison wants my people dead so he can steal our land. He does not see us as human. We are obstacles, problems to be removed. But you see my daughter as a woman who needed help. You see us as people worth saving. Because you are. And you will help us fight?" Caleb hadn't expected the question. He'd come to warn them, to give them time to prepare or flee. The thought of actually fighting against his own people, even men like Morrison, made his stomach clench. But what choice did he have? Morrison had made himself clear. The Apache would be destroyed, and anyone who stood with them. There was no middle ground anymore, no neutral territory, just a choice between right and wrong. "I'll help however I can." Red Thunder nodded slowly. "Then you are welcome among us. My warriors will protect you as one of our own, and when Morrison comes, we will stand together." He extended his hand. After a moment, Caleb clasped it. The grip was strong, calloused from years of holding weapons and tools. A warrior's hand, but also a father's hand, a leader's hand, a hand Caleb was proud to shake. Outside the teepee, evening was falling across Eagle's Nest. Warriors prepared weapons. Women packed emergency supplies in case evacuation became necessary. Children were herded inside, their games forgotten in the face of adult tension. Ayana sat by a fire, her broken leg elevated, speaking quietly with other women. When she saw Caleb emerge, she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small curve of her lips. But it carried warmth that chased away some of the cold fear in his chest. He walked over and sat beside her. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For not running. For not choosing the easy path." "Ain't nothing easy about any of this." "No." "But you still choose right over easy. That takes strength." In the distance, drums began to beat. Not war drums, prayer drums, calling on spirits and ancestors for guidance and protection. The sound echoed through the valley, primal and somehow peaceful. Caleb listened and thought about his grandmother, about what she would say if she could see him now. Probably something about how he'd inherited her talent for finding trouble, but also, maybe, that she was proud. Tomorrow, Morrison would begin gathering his forces. Tomorrow, the final pieces would fall into place for the conflict that both sides dreaded, but neither could avoid. Tomorrow would bring decisions that couldn't be unmade. But tonight, in this hidden valley, there was just the drumbeat and the firelight, and two people from different worlds who'd found common ground in the simple act of choosing compassion over hate. And sometimes, in a world bent on tearing itself apart, that was enough. Dawn of the 20th broke over Eagle's Nest territory, with a kind of crystalline clarity that made everything seem sharp-edged and fragile. Caleb woke in a guest teepee, his large frame uncomfortable on the bedding of buffalo hide and woven blankets. Around him, the Apache camp was already stirring. Women kindled fires, men checked weapons. Children's voices carried on the cool morning air, innocent of the storm gathering on the horizon. He emerged to find Grey Wolf waiting outside, the warrior's face unreadable in the early light. "Red Thunder summons you,"
The council wishes to speak. Caleb's stomach tightened. A council meant judgment, meant his fate would be decided by men who had every reason to distrust him, to see him as the enemy, despite what he'd done for Ayana. He followed Grey Wolf through the camp, aware of the eyes tracking his movement, some curious, some hostile, all wary. He was the first white man to enter Eagle's Nest in 2 years, the first to be invited rather than driven away with arrows and curses. The council lodge was larger than the other structures, its hide walls decorated with paintings that told stories of hunts and battles and migrations. Inside, 8 elders sat in a semicircle around a central fire. Red Thunder occupied the place of honor, his presence commanding despite his stillness. Ayana sat to his right, her broken leg splinted and elevated. Her eyes met Caleb's briefly, offering something that might have been encouragement. "Caleb Thornton," Red Thunder's voice filled the space. "You have entered our territory, saved my daughter, warned us of coming war. Now the council must decide what to do with you." An elder to Red Thunder's left spoke. His voice was like wind through dry grass, ancient and whispering. "This white man could be spy, could lead Morrison's dogs to our home." "He saved Ayana," another elder countered, "risked his life and his place among his people." "That speaks to character, or to clever deception," the first elder replied. "White men are skilled at lies." Grey Wolf stood. "I was there when Morrison's men tried to take her. This Bear Thornton, he stood between rifles and our chief's daughter, ready to die rather than step aside. That is not the action of a spy." The debate continued, voices rising and falling in Apache interspersed with English for Caleb's benefit. He stood silent, letting them argue his fate. Interrupting would be seen as disrespect. His grandmother had taught him that much about tribal councils. Patience and respect mattered more than eloquence. Finally, Red Thunder raised his hand. The debate ceased immediately. "Bear Thornton, you may speak. Tell this council why we should trust you, why we should believe you fight for us and not against us." Caleb took a breath, gathering his thoughts. These men had survived genocide, had watched their people slaughtered, their lands stolen, their children torn from their arms, and sent to schools designed to kill everything Apache in them. They had earned their suspicion, their hatred. He could only offer them truth. "Chief Red Thunder, honored elders, I can't make you trust me. Trust is earned through actions, not words. But I can tell you this. My grandmother was Cherokee. She survived the Trail of Tears, watched her family die because white men wanted land that didn't belong to them. She taught me that evil doesn't have a color. Good doesn't have a color. There's just people trying to do right and people trying to do wrong." He paused, looking around the circle. "Jacob Morrison is wrong. He wants your land, your gold, and he's willing to kill to get it. Willing to murder your daughter to provoke war. Willing to slaughter your families to line his pockets. I can't stop him alone, but maybe together we can show the people of Thunder Ridge the truth. Show them that Morrison's greed will destroy us all, white and Apache alike." An elder with a scar bisecting his face spoke. "Pretty words, but words are wind. What proof do you offer that you mean them?" "I have Morrison's diary." Caleb reached into his coat, careful not to move too quickly. He'd brought the journal he'd found in the abandoned mine office, written in Morrison's own hand, detailing his plans.
I found it hidden in his old office. It lays out everything. The plan to kill Ayana. The plan to blame the Apache. The locations of the gold surveys on your land." He handed the leather-bound book to Red Thunder, who opened it and began to read. The chief's face remained impassive, but his eyes grew harder with each page. "This is evidence of murder conspiracy." Red Thunder's voice was quiet but dangerous. "Evidence that would convict him in white man's court." "If we can get it to the right people," Caleb agreed. "Sheriff Sam Garrett is honest. If we can get him this diary, if we can get it to authorities beyond Morrison's reach, we might stop this without bloodshed." The oldest elder, a man whose hair was white as winter snow, leaned forward. "And if we cannot? If Morrison comes with his hired guns regardless?" "Then we fight," Caleb said simply. "And I fight beside you." The council chamber fell silent. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter, as if holding its breath. Red Thunder closed the diary and set it aside. Then he stood, and the elders stood with him. "Bear Thornton, you have spoken well. You have brought warning and evidence. You have shown courage and honor. The council has decided. You are welcome among the Apache people. You may stay as long as you wish. And when Morrison comes, you will stand with us as brother, not as outsider." The chief extended his hand. Caleb clasped it, feeling the weight of the moment. This was more than an alliance. It was acceptance into a community that had been betrayed so many times that trust was their rarest gift. But as the council dispersed and Caleb stepped back into the morning light, he knew acceptance came with a price. He had irrevocably chosen sides. There would be no going back to Thunder Ridge, no returning to his old life. He was Apache now, in the eyes of Morrison and everyone who followed him, which meant he was a target. Ayana found him standing at the edge of camp, looking toward the distant mountains that separated Eagle's Nest from Thunder Ridge. "Thinking about home?" she asked, settling herself on a log with her crutch propped beside her. "Thinking about what home means now." "You have doubts? About leaving?" "No," Caleb shook his head. "About whether I can make a difference? Yes." Ayana was quiet for a moment, watching an eagle circle overhead. Then she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "When I was a girl, my mother taught me to weave baskets. I was impatient, wanted to make big, beautiful basket right away. But she say, each basket is made one reed at a time. Each reed seems small, unimportant, but together they make something strong, something that lasts." She looked at Caleb with those amber eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You are one reed, Caleb Thornton, but you are woven together with others now. Sheriff Sam, the miners who defended you, my father and our warriors, Tommy Fletcher and Martha Thornton. Each of us is one reed, but together we make something Morrison cannot break." While they spoke, a commotion rose from the direction of the camp entrance. Voices raised in alarm, the sound of horses approaching fast. Grey Wolf appeared, running. His face was grim. Riders coming, white men, not armed for war, but Morrison's men nonetheless. Caleb's blood ran cold. They found us. No. Grey Wolf shook his head. They carry white flag. They want to talk. That's worse, Caleb muttered. Morrison doesn't negotiate unless he's planning something. They moved to the camp perimeter, where warriors had already formed a defensive line. 3 riders approached slowly, hands raised and empty. Leading them was Cyrus Garrett, his scarred throat visible even at a distance. But it was the man riding beside him that made Caleb's hands curl into fists. Jacob Morrison sat astride a magnificent bay horse, dressed in his finest suit, as if attending a business meeting rather than entering enemy territory. His silver hair gleamed in the morning sun. His face wore an expression of practiced concern. The riders stopped 20 feet from the Apache line. Morrison dismounted with theatrical slowness, keeping his hands visible. "Chief Red Thunder," his voice carried across the space between them. "I come in peace to discuss the unfortunate events of recent days." Red Thunder stepped forward, his warriors flanking him. "You come in peace, yet your men tried to murder my daughter, a terrible misunderstanding." Morrison's expression was pained. "I recently learned that certain individuals, acting without my knowledge or consent, attacked Miss Ayana. I've come to offer my sincere apologies and to assure you that the guilty parties will be punished." "Liar." The word came from Caleb before he could stop himself. He stepped forward to stand beside Red Thunder. "Your own diary proves you ordered the attack, that you planned everything." Morrison's eyes settled on Caleb, and for just a moment the mask of civility slipped. Pure hatred flashed across his face before the pleasant expression returned. "Ah, Mr. Thornton, I wondered where you'd run off to." Morrison's smile was cold. "As for this supposed diary, I'm afraid you've been deceived. There are those who would forge documents to discredit me, to destroy the prosperity I've brought to Thunder Ridge." "Show him," Caleb said to Red Thunder. The chief produced the leather journal and held it up. "This is your hand. Your words. Proof of your crimes." Morrison barely glanced at it. "A clever forgery. My handwriting is not difficult to copy." He turned to address the gathered Apache directly. "Chief Red Thunder, I know my people and yours have had conflicts, but I want peace. I want cooperation, and I'm prepared to offer generous compensation for the wrongs that have been done to your daughter." Compensation. Red Thunder's voice could have cut stone. "You think gold buys forgiveness for attempted murder?" "Not forgiveness. Justice." Morrison gestured broadly. "I propose a formal investigation, conducted by federal authorities. If evidence exists of wrongdoing by anyone in my employ, they will face the full weight of the law. In the meantime, I'm prepared to pay substantial damages to your daughter and to offer guarantees that Apache lands will be respected." It was a masterful performance. Morrison's voice rang with sincerity. His face showed nothing but earnest concern. To anyone who didn't know better, he would seem the very picture of a reasonable man trying to make amends. But Caleb had spent enough time around liars to recognize the tells. The way Morrison's eyes never quite met anyone's gaze for more than a moment. The slight tension in his shoulders that suggested coiled aggression held barely in check. The way his fingers tapped against his leg in a rhythm that spoke of impatience and calculation. "You refuse our evidence," Caleb said. "You offer investigations you control. You promise respect you've never shown. Tell us plain, Morrison. What do you really want?" Morrison's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I want to avoid bloodshed. I want peace. And I want Mr. Thornton to face justice for his crimes." "What crimes?" Red Thunder demanded. "Theft of company documents, trespassing on private property, conspiracy with hostile forces." Morrison ticked them off on his fingers. "I have Judge Harlan's authorization to arrest him. He can come willingly now, face a fair trial, and clear his name. Or he can hide among your people like a coward and prove his guilt." The trap revealed itself. Morrison didn't care about peace or compensation. He wanted Caleb, wanted him arrested, silenced, removed from the equation. Without Caleb's testimony, without his knowledge of where the diary had been found, Morrison could dismiss it as forgery, could paint the Apache as liars and aggressors. "I will not go," Caleb said firmly. "Then you admit your guilt," Morrison replied smoothly. "And Chief Red Thunder, by harboring a fugitive from justice, you give me legal grounds to request federal intervention. Troops, if necessary, to enforce the law." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Morrison had maneuvered them perfectly. Surrender Caleb and lose their only white ally, their only witness to Morrison's crimes. Refuse, and give Morrison the excuse he needed to bring in the army. Red Thunder's face was stone. "The diary is real. The crimes are yours. We will not surrender an innocent man to corrupt justice." Morrison sighed, as if disappointed. "Then I'm afraid we have nothing more to discuss." He mounted his horse with easy grace. "You have until sundown tomorrow to reconsider. After that, I will have no choice but to take action to protect the citizens of Thunder Ridge from the Apache threat you represent." "There is no threat," Caleb shouted. "The only threat comes from you." Morrison ignored him, turning his horse. But Cyrus lingered a moment longer, his scarred throat working as he struggled with words that finally came out in a rasp. "Enjoy your last day, Thornton. Tomorrow, we're coming for you, all of you." Then they rode away, leaving behind a camp buzzing with tension and fear. Grey Wolf spat in the dirt. "We should have killed them when we had the chance." "And started the war Morrison wants?" Red Thunder shook his head. "No. We do this the right way. We find way to expose truth before violence comes." "But how?" Ayana's voice carried frustration. "Morrison controls the judge, controls the law. Even if we show diary to others, who believes Apache over white man with power?" Caleb's mind raced, trying to find an angle, a solution, anything that might change the trajectory they were on. And then it came to him. The miners. Martha and the others who stood up for me in town. They're not all blind to Morrison's corruption. If we can get word to them, if we can show them the diary before Morrison acts, they might stand with us. "And how do we get word to them?" Grey Wolf's tone was skeptical. "Morrison watches Thunder Ridge now. His men patrol the roads." "Tommy Fletcher," Caleb said. "The boy knows these woods better than anyone. He could slip through Morrison's patrols, could get to Martha and Sam, show them the evidence." "You would trust much to a child," Red Thunder observed. "He's young, but he's brave, and he believes in doing right." Caleb met the chief's eyes. "Let me go back to the camp edge. Write a letter explaining everything. Tommy will come if I signal him. He checks the old trails every morning, gathering herbs for his mother." Red Thunder considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Write your letter. We will send a warrior with you to ensure safe passage. But Bear Thornton, understand this. If you are captured, if this plan fails, we cannot save you. Morrison will have what he wants." "I understand. And still you risk it?" "Still I risk it. Because it's the right thing to do." A ghost of a smile crossed Red Thunder's face. "Your grandmother would be proud of the man you have become." As evening fell, Caleb sat by firelight with Ayana, carefully writing out everything he knew on pages torn from the diary's back. Morrison's plans, the location where the journal had been found, the names of Cyrus and the men who'd attacked Ayana. Everything that might convince the good people of Thunder Ridge that their prosperity was built on murder and lies. Ayana watched him write, her face thoughtful in the flickering light. "If this works, if the miners stand with us, Morrison will target you first. You know this?
I know.
You could leave. Go west. Start over somewhere Morrison's reach does not extend.
I could.
Caleb looked up from his writing. But I won't.
Why?
You owe us nothing. You have done more than any white man ever has. Because, Caleb set down his pen and met her eyes, because running away doesn't change what's wrong. Morrison will still be here, destroying lives for profit. The Apache will still face his greed, and I'll have to live knowing I could have made a difference and chose safety instead. He paused, searching for the right words. My grandmother used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by what he has or what he achieves. It's measured by what he's willing to sacrifice for what's right.
I'm not worth much by most measures, but maybe, if I can help stop Morrison, if I can save even one life, then my life will have meant something. Ayana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. When this is over, when peace comes again, you will always have place among my people. You are brother to the Apache now, Caleb Thornton. Brother in truth, not just in word. Before Caleb could respond, Grey Wolf appeared from the darkness. It is time. We must go now, while night covers our movement. Caleb folded the letter carefully, sealing it with wax from the fire. Then he stood, checking the knife at his belt and the rifle Grey Wolf handed him. He looked back at Ayana one last time. Her amber eyes reflected the firelight, holding something he couldn't quite name, but felt in his chest like a physical weight. "Be careful," she said. "Always am." Liar. But she smiled when she said it. Then Caleb and Grey Wolf melted into the night, heading toward Thunder Ridge and a desperate gamble that might save them all, or doom them to the war that Morrison so desperately wanted. Behind them, in Eagle's Nest, drums began to beat. Not war drums yet, but preparation drums. The sound of a people ready to defend their home against whatever morning might bring. And in that sound was both defiance and sorrow, the knowledge that peace was slipping through their fingers like water, and that soon, very soon, blood would water the Virginia soil once more. The night of July 21st wrapped Thunder Ridge in velvet darkness, broken only by scattered lamplight from windows where fearful people watched and waited. Caleb and Grey Wolf moved through the forest like ghosts, following game trails that wound through stands of pine so thick that starlight couldn't penetrate the canopy. They were 2 hours from Eagle's Nest when Grey Wolf suddenly stopped, his hand raised in warning. Caleb froze, straining to hear what the Apache warrior's sharper senses had detected. Then he heard it. Voices. Men speaking in low tones, trying to be quiet, but failing in the way people do when they think themselves alone in the wilderness. "Morrison's patrol," Grey Wolf whispered, "between us and Thunder Ridge. Can we go around?" Too many. They spread across all trails. Grey Wolf's face was grim in the faint moonlight. They wait for someone, maybe for you. The trap had been set carefully. Morrison knew Caleb would try to reach his allies, knew he would use the forest paths he'd traveled since childhood, and so he'd put men on every route, waiting with patience, born of promised gold. "We go back," Grey Wolf said. "Live to fight another day." But before they could retreat, new sounds erupted from the darkness. Horses approaching fast, torchlight flickering through the trees, and voices raised in alarm. "Someone's coming through! Check the south trail!
Move, move, move!
The patrol was converging on their position. Caleb and Grey Wolf ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Branches whipped at their faces. Roots threatened to trip them. Behind, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They burst into a small clearing just as riders emerged from 3 different directions, cutting off escape. Torches held high revealed 8 men on horseback, rifles drawn and aimed. And leading them, his scarred throat catching the firelight, was Cyrus Garrett. "End of the line, Thornton." Cyrus's smile was ugly with triumph. "Boss said you'd try something stupid. Guess he knows you better than you know yourself." Grey Wolf's hand moved toward his knife, but Caleb caught his wrist. 8 rifles, 2 men. The math was simple and brutal. "Let him go," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the fear hammering in his chest. "Your quarrel's with me, not him. Our quarrel's with anyone helping the savages." Cyrus dismounted, keeping his rifle pointed at Caleb's chest. "But I'll make you a deal. You come quiet, we'll let your Indian friend run back to his people with his scalp still attached. And if I refuse? Then we kill you both here and now. Won't lose any sleep over it." Caleb looked at Grey Wolf, saw the warrior's jaw tighten with frustration and shame. The Apache had been trained since childhood never to surrender, never to back down. But Caleb had also seen the intelligence in Grey Wolf's eyes. The man understood tactics, understood that sometimes retreat was necessary to fight another day. "Go," Caleb said quietly. "Tell Red Thunder what happened. Tell him to be ready. I cannot leave you. You can and you will." Caleb managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Besides, I'm too stubborn to die easy. Morrison wants me alive anyway. Has questions only I can answer. This is not honorable. Honor's a luxury we can't afford right now." Caleb turned to Cyrus. "Let him go. I'll come without a fight." Cyrus considered this, then shrugged. "Fine. One less Apache to deal with. But if I see him again, I shoot first, and don't bother with questions." Grey Wolf met Caleb's eyes one last time. There was something in that look, a promise maybe, or a vow. Then he turned and melted into the darkness with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. The hired guns raised their rifles, but Cyrus waved them down. "Let him go. We got what we came for." Rough hands seized Caleb, binding his wrists with rope that cut into the skin. They stripped him of his weapons, his knife, the rifle Grey Wolf had given him, even the small medicine pouch his grandmother had left him, everything that connected him to who he was and who he'd chosen to become. "Morrison's going to be real pleased," Cyrus said, checking the knots with professional efficiency. "Been waiting for this moment since you stuck your nose where it don't belong." "Where's that? Saving innocent people from murder?" Cyrus backhanded him across the mouth. The blow split Caleb's lip and filled his mouth with the copper taste of blood. "Where's that is minding your own damn business. This land, these mountains, they belong to men strong enough to take them, not savages, not bleeding hearts like you. Men with vision and the will to see it through. Men like Morrison, you mean? Men willing to kill for gold. Gold builds empires, Thornton, builds futures. What's a few dead Indians against progress?" They dragged Caleb to a horse and threw him across the saddle like a sack of grain. The world turned upside down, his head hanging toward the ground as they rode. Blood rushed to his face. His bound hands went numb. But through the discomfort and fear, Caleb's mind worked frantically. Morrison wanted him alive for now. That meant time. Not much, but some.
Time for Grey Wolf to reach Eagle's Nest. Time for Red Thunder to prepare. Time for Tommy Fletcher to possibly get the letter Caleb had hidden in his boot before they'd searched him. He just had to stay alive long enough for any of it to matter. They rode for an hour. When they finally stopped, Caleb recognized the location with a sickening lurch of his stomach. Devil's Gorge, where he'd first found Ayana, broken and bleeding, where Morrison's men had tried to make murder look like accident. The irony was not lost on him. They hauled Caleb off the horse and threw him to the ground. His shoulder hit hard, sending pain lancing through his body. Through blurred vision, he saw more torches, more men. And standing at the center of it all, immaculate despite the late hour, was Jacob Morrison. The mine owner approached with slow deliberation, savoring the moment. He crouched beside Caleb, close enough that his cologne cut through the smell of horses and pine smoke. "Mr. Thornton," Morrison's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "You've caused me considerable trouble. Cost me time, money, political capital."
All for what? A savage woman you didn't even know? Caleb spat blood. "For doing what's right. Concept you wouldn't understand." "Oh, I understand right quite well." Morrison stood, brushing invisible dirt from his trousers. "Right is what advances civilization, what builds prosperity, what separates men from animals. You chose the animals, Thornton. Now you'll die like one." He gestured, and Caleb saw it for the first time. A rectangular hole in the ground, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, deep enough that the bottom was lost in shadow. Fresh dirt piled beside it in a mound that looked obscene in the torchlight. A grave, dug and waiting. Terror clawed at Caleb's throat. He'd faced death before, in the mines when tunnels collapsed, in the forest when winter storms turned deadly. But those had been quick ends. This was something else, something calculated and cruel. "You're going to bury me alive," Morrison smiled. "Not immediately. First, we're going to talk. You're going to tell me where you hid my diary. The real one, not whatever forgery you gave the Apache. And you're going to tell me everything you shared with Red Thunder. What he knows, what he's planning. And if I don't, then we start filling in the hole. Slowly. Give you time to reconsider between each shovelful." Morrison's tone remained pleasant, as if discussing the weather. "I'm told a man can survive about 30 minutes in a grave before the air runs out. 30 minutes is a long time to think about your choices." Caleb's mind raced. The diary was still at Eagle's Nest. The letter was in his boot, unnoticed in the rough search Cyrus's men had conducted. If he could keep Morrison talking, keep him distracted, maybe someone would come. Maybe Grey Wolf had doubled back with warriors. Maybe Tommy had found the letter after all and was bringing help. Maybe. Perhaps. Possibly. Desperate hopes in a desperate situation. Morrison read the calculation in Caleb's eyes and laughed. "No one's coming, Thornton. I have 50 men surrounding this area. Your Apache friends would be cut down before they got within 100 yards. Sheriff Garrett is locked in his own jail, and the good people of Thunder Ridge are home in their beds, believing you're a traitor who got what he deserved." Caleb found his voice. "They'll know the truth eventually. Can't hide murder forever. Can't I?" Morrison gestured broadly. "Out here, in the wilderness, accidents happen. Graves go unmarked. People disappear, and the world moves on. You'll be a footnote, Thornton, a cautionary tale about what happens to those who forget their place." He nodded to Cyrus. "Put him in."
4 men grabbed Caleb, hauling him to his feet despite his struggles. He fought with everything he had, twisting, kicking, using his weight to throw them off balance. But bound and outnumbered, he was fighting a battle already lost. They dragged him to the edge of the grave and threw him in.
He hit the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The walls rose on all sides, close enough to touch, but too smooth to climb. Above, the night sky was a rectangle of stars framed by earth. Faces appeared at the rim. Cyrus, Morrison's hired guns, all watching with the casual interest of men observing something mildly entertaining. And then Morrison's face, serene and satisfied. "Last chance, Thornton. Where's the diary?" Caleb's voice came out as a rasp. "Go to hell." "After you." Morrison stepped back. A shovelful of dirt hit Caleb's chest, then another, and another, the rhythm steady and methodical, burying him one scoop at a time, just as Morrison had promised. The dirt rose past his boots, his knees, each shovelful stealing more of the space around him. Caleb tried to stand, but the walls were too close. Tried to dig out, but his bound hands couldn't find purchase in the crumbling earth. Panic seized him, the kind of primal terror that lives in the oldest parts of the human brain. The fear of suffocation, of burial, of being swallowed by the earth and forgotten. He wanted to scream, to beg, to promise Morrison anything if he'd just stopped the dirt from falling. But through the panic, he heard his grandmother's voice, a memory so vivid it might have been real. She was singing one of the old Cherokee songs, a healing song she'd taught him on long summer evenings when the mountains turned purple with twilight. The song was about endurance, about how the world could break your body, but never your spirit if you held fast to what mattered. About how even in deepest darkness there was light, if you knew where to look. Caleb grabbed hold of that memory like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He forced himself to breathe slowly, despite the rising earth. Forced himself to think. The medicine pouch. They'd taken it, but Morrison didn't know what it contained. The sacred herbs Ayana had given him. The ones that would send smoke signals if burned. She'd said the Apache would come if he called. He'd hidden a second pouch in the lining of his boot, insurance in case the first was lost or stolen. If he could somehow reach it, if he could light it, maybe the smoke would rise through the loose dirt. Maybe someone would see and understand. It was a desperate hope, but it was all he had. The dirt was at his waist now. Caleb twisted, using what little movement he had left to work his bound hands toward his boot. His fingers were numb from the tight rope. The angle was wrong. Every movement made dirt cascade down, filling the space he'd created. But he kept trying, kept fighting, because giving up meant death, and he wasn't ready to die. Not here, not like this, not when so many people were counting on him. Above, Morrison's voice drifted down. "Nothing to say, Thornton? No final words? No pleas for mercy?" Caleb ignored him, focused entirely on the boot. His fingers touched leather. Slipped. Tried again. The dirt was at his chest now, pressing down with weight that made breathing difficult. And then, miraculously, his fingers found the hidden pouch. Small and supple, sewn into the boot's lining, where only someone looking specifically for it would notice. He worked it free, the sacred herbs inside giving off a faint scent that cut through the smell of earth. But lighting it was impossible with his hands bound and dirt rising past his shoulders.
Unless... In his pocket, Morrison's men had missed the small flint and steel he used for starting fires. They'd been looking for weapons, not fire-making tools, and in their haste, they'd overlooked the most basic of mountain survival equipment. Caleb maneuvered the flint out with fingers that had lost almost all feeling.
The steel was harder, requiring contortions that made his shoulders scream. But desperation gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. The dirt reached his neck. He tilted his head back, trying to keep his nose and mouth clear. The world narrowed to the small rectangle of sky above and the impossible task of creating fire in a grave. One strike of flint against steel. Sparks flew and died in the dirt. Another strike. More sparks. One caught on the herbs, flared bright for an instant, then went out. The dirt touched his chin. Third strike. This time the herb caught and held. Smoke rose, thin and fragile, but unmistakable. The sacred sage and cedar mix that only Apache medicine women knew how to prepare. Smoke that carried prayers and signals across distances no voice could span. Caleb watched it rise through the falling dirt, a thread of hope climbing toward the stars. Then the earth covered his mouth, his nose. Everything went dark. He held his breath, counted seconds, tried not to think about how little air remained in the small space around his head, how each moment brought him closer to the end. 30 seconds. His lungs burned. 45. Pain lanced through his chest. 60. The world started to gray at the edges, despite the darkness. His body screamed for air that wasn't there. And then, impossibly, he heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats. Many horses, moving fast. War cries in Apache, splitting the night. Gunfire, shouting. The sounds of battle erupting overhead. The shoveling stopped. Morrison's voice rose in alarm. "What the hell?" More gunfire, screams, the meaty thud of bodies hitting ground. And then, silence. Terrible and complete. Caleb's consciousness was slipping away. The lack of oxygen pulling him down into darkness that had nothing to do with the grave. He'd done what he could, sent the signal, brought help, but it might have come too late. He thought of Ayana, of her amber eyes and fierce spirit, of the future they might have had if the world had been different, if men like Morrison didn't exist. He thought of his grandmother and hoped she'd be proud of the man he'd become. Then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of his name being called from very far away. Caleb. The voice was familiar. Female. Desperate. "Caleb!" Closer now. Urgent. "Hold on! We're coming!" The earth above him shifted, moved. Hands digging frantically, pulling away the dirt that entombed him. Light appeared, small at first, then growing as more earth was cleared away. Fresh air hit his face like a physical blow. He gasped, choking, coughing up dirt and blood. Hands pulled him upward, strong hands, many of them, lifting him from the grave that had so nearly become his final resting place. He lay on solid ground, gulping air in great heaving breaths while the world spun around him. Faces swam into focus. Gray Wolf, Red Thunder, a dozen Apache warriors, and Ayana, collapsing to the ground beside him despite the white-hot pain shooting through her broken leg, her hands on his face, checking for injuries with a healer's practiced touch. "You came," he managed to croak. Gray Wolf saw the smoke. She was crying, he realized dimly, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "We rode as fast as we could. Thought we were too late." "Almost were," Caleb admitted.
Then his eyes found the scattered bodies of Morrison's men, some dead, others wounded, and being rounded up by Apache warriors. But Morrison himself was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" "Ran like a coward," Grey Wolf said with disgust. "When we attack, he mount horse and flee, left his men to die." "We'll find him," Red Thunder promised. "But first, we get you to safety, get you healed." They lifted Caleb gently, carrying him to where horses waited. As they rode away from Devil's Gorge, away from the grave that had so nearly claimed him, Caleb looked back one last time. The hole remained, a dark rectangle in the earth, a reminder of how close he'd come to darkness eternal. But smoke still rose from it. The sacred herbs still burned, and in that smoke was a message that Morrison would eventually understand. Some debts can't be buried, some truths can't be silenced, and some men, when pushed to the edge of their own graves, discover that mercy and justice are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs everything. Dawn of the 22nd came to Eagle's Nest territory not with violence, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows storms, the kind that speaks of survived trials and battles yet to come. Caleb woke in the healing lodge, his body aching in places he didn't know could hurt. His throat was raw from dirt and screaming. His wrists bore rope burns that wept clear fluid. But he was alive. Against all odds and Morrison's careful planning, he had survived burial and lived to see another sunrise. Ayana sat beside him, her broken leg elevated, but her attention fully focused on checking his wounds. Her hands were gentle but thorough, the touch of someone who understood healing on levels that went beyond mere technique. "You should still be sleeping," she said when his eyes opened. "Hard to sleep when the world's ending." "World not ending, just changing." Her amber eyes met his. "And you are alive to see it change. That is victory." Before Caleb could respond, voices rose outside the lodge, urgent, alarmed. Red Thunder appeared in the entrance, his face grave. "Morrison returns, with army." "How many?" Caleb struggled to sit up, despite Ayana's protests. 50 men, maybe more. Red Thunder's voice was steady, but his eyes held the weight of command. "They gather at Thunder Ridge. Will attack by noon." "Then we fight," Grey Wolf said from where he stood near the entrance. "We have prepared. We are ready." But Red Thunder shook his head slowly. "We are outnumbered 2-1. If we fight here, many will die. Women, children, elders who cannot flee fast enough. Then what do we do?" Ayana's voice carried frustration. "Run again? Hide again? My people have run enough." "No more running," Caleb said. His voice was hoarse but firm. "We end this, today, but not with bullets." All eyes turned to him. Morrison's weakness isn't his army, it's his lies. Everything he's built is constructed on making people afraid, making them believe the Apache are the enemy. But what if we could show Thunder Ridge the truth? Show them Morrison's own words condemning him. "The diary," Red Thunder said. "Not just the diary." Caleb pushed himself fully upright, despite the pain. "We need witnesses. People Morrison can't dismiss or silence. We need to bring the fight to Thunder Ridge itself. Make him answer for his crimes in front of everyone." "That is suicide," Grey Wolf protested. "Walk into town with Morrison's army waiting?" "Maybe." Caleb met the warrior's eyes. "But it's the only way to stop this without a massacre." "Morrison wants war, because war gives him cover, gives him excuse to take what he wants. But justice? Public justice? That's what he fears most. Red Thunder was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Then he nodded slowly. "You speak wisdom, Bear Thornton. But if we do this, we do it right. We bring not just diary, but proof Morrison cannot deny. We bring his own men who surrendered last night. Let them testify to his orders. And we bring Sheriff Sam," Caleb added, "if he's still alive." "He lives," Grey Wolf confirmed. "I saw him locked in jail when we scouted town this morning. Morrison keeps him alive to maintain appearance of law. Then we break him out." Caleb stood on unsteady legs. "We bring the law, the evidence, and the truth. And we make Morrison face all three in front of his own people." 2 hours later, a strange procession made its way down the mountain toward Thunder Ridge.
At its head rode Red Thunder and Caleb, side by side. Behind them came 20 Apache warriors, armed but with weapons lowered in a gesture of peace. And in the center, bound and guarded, rode 8 of Morrison's hired guns, who had been captured at Devil's Gorge. The morning sun climbed higher as they descended. Birds sang in trees that didn't care about human conflicts. A deer watched from a distant ridge, then bounded away into the forest's green embrace. The world continued its ancient rhythms, while below, in the valley town, men prepared for violence. They were half a mile from Thunder Ridge when Tommy Fletcher burst from the tree line, running full tilt toward them. The boy's face was flushed with exertion and fear. "Bear! Thank God!" He skidded to a stop, gasping for breath. "I got your letter, showed it to Martha and the others. But Morrison, he found out. He's got men everywhere. Says he's going to attack the Apache camp at noon. Says it's self-defense." "How many people believe him?" Caleb asked. Tommy's face fell. "Most. They're scared, Bear. Morrison's got them convinced the Apache are coming to massacre everyone. He's passed out weapons. Even got Reverend Blake praying for protection from the savage horde." "And Sheriff Sam? Still locked up. Morrison says he's been compromised. Says he can't be trusted." Caleb looked at Red Thunder. The chief's expression remained calm, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a man weighing terrible odds. "We continue," Red Thunder said simply. "Fear is powerful, but truth is more powerful. We will see which Thunder Ridge chooses." They rode into town at 10 o'clock, when the sun had burned away the morning mist and left the world sharp and clear. The main street was packed with people. Men holding rifles they barely knew how to use. Women with children clutched close. The whole population of Thunder Ridge turned out like spectators at an execution. And standing on the steps of the general store, surrounded by 30 hired guns with weapons drawn, was Jacob Morrison. He looked fresh and confident, dressed in a new suit that probably cost more than most miners earned in a year. When he saw the approaching procession, his smile was that of a man who'd already won. "Chief Red Thunder," he called out, his voice carrying across the silent street. "How good of you to save us the trouble of coming to you. And you've brought Mr. Thornton back. How considerate." "We come under flag of truce," Red Thunder replied. "We come to speak truth before violence comes." "Truth?" Morrison laughed. "The truth is, you harbor criminals. The truth is, you threaten peaceful citizens. The truth is, I have legal authority to remove the Apache threat permanently." He pulled a document from his coat and held it high. Federal authorization, signed by the territorial governor himself. Permission to use any force necessary to protect American settlers from hostile forces. The crowd murmured, fear and excitement mixing in a volatile combination. Caleb dismounted slowly, every movement calculated to appear non-threatening. He walked forward until he stood at the base of the steps, looking up at Morrison with eyes that had seen the man's true face in the darkness of a grave. "That authorization is based on lies," Caleb said. His voice was rough from his ordeal, but it carried. "On false reports of Apache aggression that never happened. On manufactured evidence and murdered witnesses. You're a wanted man, Thornton." Morrison's smile never wavered. "Your word means nothing." "Then let's not use my word." Caleb gestured to the bound prisoners. "Let's use yours." He turned to face the crowd. "These men were captured last night at Devil's Gorge. Captured while following Morrison's orders to bury me alive. To silence me before I could expose his crimes." The crowd stirred, doubt beginning to crack through the fear. "Lies," Morrison said smoothly. "These men were attempting to arrest a fugitive who resisted. Then ask them." Caleb pointed to the nearest prisoner, a hard-faced man named Dixon. "Ask him what Morrison's orders were." Dixon looked at Morrison, then at the crowd, then at the ground. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Boss said to make it look like an accident. Said to bury Thornton and leave no trace." The murmur from the crowd grew louder. "And the Apache woman?" Caleb pressed. "The chief's daughter who was thrown from a cliff? Who ordered that?" Dixon's silence was answer enough. But another prisoner, younger and clearly terrified, broke. "It was Mr. Morrison. He paid Cyrus $500 to kill her and make it look like a fall. Said it would start a war. Said we'd all get rich when we took the Apache land." Morrison's composure cracked for the first time. His hand moved toward his coat, where Caleb knew he kept a derringer. But Sheriff Sam's voice cut across the chaos. "I wouldn't, Jacob." The old lawman stood in the entrance to his jail, the door hanging open behind him. In his hands was a shotgun pointed directly at Morrison. Beside him stood Martha Thornton, holding the keys she'd used to free him. Martha stepped forward, her weathered face set with determination. "I've known Jacob Morrison for 15 years. Watched him come to this town with nothing but ambition and smooth words. Watched him get rich while good men died in his mines." Her voice carried the authority of age and survival. "And I'm here to say that Bear Thornton speaks the truth. Morrison is the threat, not the Apache." Other voices rose from the crowd. Miners who'd lost friends in Morrison's cost-cutting accidents, families who'd been cheated of fair wages, people who'd kept silent out of fear but found courage in numbers. Morrison saw his control slipping, his face contorted with rage as he reached for his weapon. But Ayana was faster. She'd dismounted with Grey Wolf's help, her broken leg splinted but still throbbing with every movement. Bracing herself against a hitching post, she drew her throwing knife with the precision of a trained warrior. The blade caught morning sunlight as it spun through the air and buried itself in the wooden post inches from Morrison's hand. The message was clear. The next throw would not miss. Morrison froze, his hand still outstretched toward his gun. "It's over, Jacob," Sheriff Sam said, walking slowly toward the steps. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and inciting violence. You'll stand trial. Real trial. With a judge who isn't in your pocket." Morrison's eyes darted around the crowd, looking for allies. Finding none. Even his hired guns had lowered their weapons, understanding that the tide had turned irreversibly. "You'll never make it stick," Morrison said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "I have lawyers, connections, money, and we have this." Red Thunder produced the diary, holding it high for all to see. "Your own words, your own plans, written in your hand.
No lawyer can argue away your own confession. Morrison's shoulders sagged. For the first time since Caleb had known him, the man looked old, defeated. "Where's Cyrus?" someone in the crowd called out. Sheriff Sam's expression grew grim. "Found him at first light, dead in the woods near Devil's Gorge. Looks like he tried to run during the Apache attack last night." Gray Wolf stepped forward, his voice flat. "He died fighting, as he lived." Caleb felt no satisfaction at the news, just the hollow recognition that violence had claimed another life. Even a life as cruel as Cyrus Garrett's left a void that would be felt by someone. An uncle who tried to be better than his nephew. A family line ending in blood and dishonor. Deputies came forward, men Sam deputized on the spot from the crowd of miners. They took Morrison into custody with rough efficiency. No gentleness, no respect, just the cold handling of a criminal who had pretended to be a pillar of the community. As they led him away, Morrison's eyes found Caleb one last time. "You should have stayed buried," he said. Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe, but some things are worth rising from the grave for. Justice, truth, people who deserve better than what men like you would give them." Morrison was dragged away, still protesting, still threatening. But his words had no power anymore. They were just noise. The desperate sounds of a man who'd built an empire on lies, watching it crumble. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low voices, processing what they'd witnessed. Some looked ashamed, others relieved. All of them changed by the knowledge that they'd come within moments of becoming accessories to genocide. Red Thunder approached Sheriff Sam, extending his hand. "You are a good man, Sheriff Sam Garrett. You choose law over fear. That is true courage." Sam shook the offered hand firmly. "And you're a good leader, Chief Red Thunder. Your restraint today saved lives on both sides." "What happens now?" Ayana asked, standing beside Caleb, with her hand unconsciously resting on his arm. Sam considered the question. "Now we heal. We hold a proper trial. We show that justice can work the way it's supposed to. And we figure out how Apache and settlers can live as neighbors instead of enemies." "And Judge Harlan?" Caleb asked. "The man who gave Morrison legal cover?" Sam spat into the dirt. "Left on the morning stage before dawn. Guess he figured his career couldn't survive being tied to Morrison's schemes. We've already sent word to Richmond requesting a new circuit judge, one with a cleaner reputation." Red Thunder spoke quietly. "In my experience, corrupt men who run are more dangerous than corrupt men who stay. He will find new masters to serve." "Which is why we document everything," Sam replied. "Make sure his part in this is on record. He might escape justice today, but his name will carry the stain." "Will it work?" Tommy Fletcher asked, his young face earnest with hope. "Depends on us," Caleb said, "on whether we choose to remember what divides us or what we share. We all want safety for our families, prosperity, peace. The land's big enough for everyone if greed doesn't poison it." Red Thunder nodded. "My people will sign treaty. Fair treaty. We keep sacred lands. You keep mining lands. We trade. We help each other. We prove that different peoples can live in peace." "And if someone like Morrison comes again," Martha asked, "someone else who wants to stir up hate for profit?" "Then we remember today," Caleb said. "We remember what almost happened, and we choose different." 6 months later, on a cold January morning in 1888, Caleb stood before a building that hadn't existed in the summer, the Thunder Ridge and Eagle's Nest Healing Center, built on neutral ground between the two communities, constructed with timber from Apache lands and labor from Thunder Ridge miners. A symbol of cooperation where once there'd been only suspicion. The building was simple but sturdy. One large room for treatment, a smaller room for medicines and supplies, living quarters for whatever healers were on duty. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning.
Inside, Caleb worked alongside an Apache medicine woman named White Dove, treating a miner's infected wound with a combination of his surgical training and her herbal knowledge. At the next table, Ayana, her leg finally healed, taught a young white woman named Sarah how to set a broken bone properly. The door opened, bringing cold wind and Tommy Fletcher. The boy was taller now, filling out with the promise of the man he'd become. He'd apprenticed himself to Caleb, learning medicine with the fierce dedication of youth. "Bear, got a patient for you. Old Sam fell off his horse. Thinks he broke a rib." Caleb smiled. "Tell him to come in. And Tommy, stop growing so fast. You'll be taller than me by spring." "Yes, sir." The boy grinned and ducked back outside. Ayana came over, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. Her eyes held warmth that went beyond professional courtesy. "You did good thing, Caleb Thornton. This place, it helps many people." "We did good thing," he corrected. "Couldn't have built it without your father's blessing, without your knowledge." She smiled. "Perhaps we make good team. Perhaps we do." Outside, the sound of children playing drifted through the windows. Apache and white children together. Their laughter proof that fear could be unlearned, that hate wasn't inevitable. Morrison had been tried and convicted, sentenced to hang for his crimes. But the governor had commuted it to life in prison, perhaps out of mercy, or perhaps out of recognition that executing him would make him a martyr to those who shared his views. Either way, he was gone. His empire dissolved. His legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the cost of greed. Red Thunder entered the healing center, his presence commanding attention despite his quiet approach. He'd aged in the months since the confrontation, but his eyes remained sharp. "Bear Thornton, Ayana, the council wishes to speak with you." "Both?" Ayana looked surprised. "Both. There is proposal." Red Thunder's face gave nothing away. They followed him to Eagle's Nest, where the tribal council had gathered. The elders who'd once debated whether to trust Caleb now greeted him with respect. Brothers in spirit, if not in blood. The eldest among them, Whitehair, spoke in Apache. Ayana translated. "The council has decided to honor Bear Thornton with a new name, a name that reflects who he has become to our people." Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. "We call you Earthwalker." Whitehair continued through Ayana's translation. "Because you walked through the earth itself, through the grave, and emerged. Because you walk between our world and the white world, bringing healing to both." The honor was overwhelming. Caleb tried to find words adequate to the moment, and failed. Finally, he simply placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head. "I am honored beyond measure." "There is more," Red Thunder said. "The council also believes it is time my daughter chose her own path. She has always been warrior and healer. Now she must decide which path to walk most fully." Ayana looked at her father, then at Caleb. "I choose healing, but not healing of just Apache, healing of all people. I wish to remain at the center, to teach and learn, to build bridges." "Then it is decided." Red Thunder's stern face softened with what might have been pride. "You will lead the healing center, and Earthwalker will stand beside you."
As they walked back to the center, through snow that muffled all sound, Ayana slipped her hand into Caleb's. The gesture was simple, but spoke volumes. "You regret any of it?" she asked. "All that happened? All you lost?" Caleb thought about his old life, the cabin he'd abandoned, the simple existence of a mountain healer working alone. All gone now, burned away in the fires of conflict and choice. But what had replaced it was something richer, a community that spanned cultures, work that mattered on a larger scale.
And this woman walking beside him, fierce and gentle in equal measure, who'd saved his life as surely as he'd saved hers.
"No regrets," he said. "Sometimes the grave we're meant to rise from isn't made of earth. Sometimes it's made of fear and hatred and the lies we tell ourselves about who deserves compassion." Ayana squeezed his hand. "Your grandmother would be proud." "Yeah," Caleb smiled, looking up at mountains that had witnessed so much pain and now cradled fragile hope. "Yeah, I think she would be." They walked on through the snow, leaving footprints that would soon be covered, but whose direction would remain. Forward, together, toward a future where mercy proved stronger than hate, where justice could be won without war, and where two people from different worlds discovered that healing recognizes no boundaries. In the sacred mountains of Virginia, where darkness once tried to bury hope beneath 6 feet of red clay, light now grew from seeds planted by those who refused to let hatred have the final word. And the healer's oath to ease suffering without boundary echoed through generations that would follow. A testament that some debts are paid not in blood or gold, but in the kind of mercy that crosses mountains, builds bridges from broken earth, and transforms graves into gardens where new life takes root. The end.